Undead and Married is a romantic vampire cozy mystery and is book one in Andy Lowe's Blood Bond Agency series. The series is published by Squabbling Sparrows Press and is also available in ebook and paperback.
Chapter 30. Captain Hugo lay on the floor next to Sebastian's bed. Unfortunately, his throat was still intact, unlike the young woman sprawled next to him. Dominik sprang forward and grabbed the police chief by the scruff of the neck, sending him flying across the room, where he landed in a heap in the corner. But they were too late. Too late to save the young woman lying drained on the floor. Eva rounded on the odious captain. Why? Why would you do that? You aren't a vampire. Hugo propped himself up against the wall, glaring at her, hate in his eyes, his chin, neck, and chest awash with the young woman's blood. He said if I kept quiet, he'd help me. He said if I drank enough blood, he could make me immortal. On screaming the last word, the captain's expression changed from one of anger to something far more crazed. You idiot! Magda stomped over and kicked Hugo hard. This is not how we create vampires. It worked for him. Hugo gestured wildly toward the bed before spitting out, "What would you know, you stupid woman?" On hearing air being sucked through teeth, Eva turned to find Luca and Dominik staring at the captain and shaking their heads. Luca tisked loudly. "Rookie mistake. Call me a stupid woman, would you?" hissed Magda before sending the captain to hell. Eva, appalled by the horrific scene, turned away and leaned over, taking in deep gulps of air. Dominik, sensing her distress, was soon at her side, rubbing her back and asking if she was okay. No, she wasn't okay. His pageant-ready cousin had just ripped a man's heart out and was holding it aloft like Miss Congeniality. Eva. Dominik continued rubbing her back, infusing her with soft energy. His calming touch soon easing the tension in her muscles. I know it's hard, he whispered, but he deserved to die for what he did. While she understood this and couldn't argue with his logic, the sight of all that blood turned her stomach. It was why she still lived under the protection of her grandmother. What's going on? This sleepy query from the enormous bed had Eva realizing it was later in the day than she'd thought. On the plus side, dealing with Sebastian once and for all would surely take her mind off the recent demise of Captain Hugo. It didn't matter how much energy the four of them threw at Sebastian, they couldn't get any sense or information out of him. After seeing who was crowded around his bed and the state of Captain Hugo in the corner, he had been close-lipped and terrified. Their only hope of getting any sense out of him now was to take over his mind completely. But with none of them having the requisite skill set, it was time to call in reinforcements. The signal-blocking properties of Sebastian's sleeping chamber were enough to have them returning to the main floor of the home. Rather than leave Sebastian behind, they dragged him upstairs, dumping him in a heap next to the deflated vampire. But the police, they're out front. And Raph, he should have been. How? Sebastian's gaze darted around the large room, only to return to the ex-vampire. But. After this, Sebastian fell silent. While his mouth was shut tight, his eyes were wide, sweeping back and forth over the unconscious man next to him. Eventually, he reached out, his hand touching the man's rosy cheek. There was nothing restrained about how quickly he took his hand away. It was as if he'd been burned. It took a while, but his mutters of "but how" eventually died away. Eva crossed everything that Didi was as good at mind control as Georgia had always said. She would need to be, if they were to get any information out of Sebastian. Eventually, a reply to Eva's text pinged, and she smiled broadly on reading it. Sebastian wouldn't know what had hit him. She was also setting Didi loose on the mystery vampire to find out what his part was in all of this. Dominik looked at her, an eyebrow quirked. What are you smiling about? The girls. They're on their way. If anyone can make sense of Sebastian's gray matter, it's Didi. The words had barely left Eva's mouth when Luca's head snapped up. Didi? As in Didi Polanski? While the question appeared straightforward, his face was a mix of emotions, with the most prominent being fear. Busy examining his response to her receptionist's imminent arrival, Eva didn't answer. Luca dragged Magda to his side, holding her tightly as if the woman needed protection. Something Eva doubted was required. That was until she took in the fear on Magda's face. What's up with you two? Didi's a sweetheart. Dominik's met her. Eva looked up at him. You found her okay, didn't you? Dominik's brow wrinkled, leaving Eva unsure if he was confused about meeting the agency's receptionist or thinking back on whether the woman was a sweetheart. Apparently, Luca had no trouble interpreting his friend's bewilderment. 5'0" blonde curls, looks innocent, anything but. Dominik's confusion changed to horror in a blink. Your receptionist? Your receptionist is Deloise Polanski? Without conscious thought, Eva scanned him to see what the problem was. However, with his energy spiky and hard to read, she was none the wiser. Yes. What of it? No one answered. Instead, they all stared at her open-mouthed, except for Sebastian, who was now poking the deflated vampire experimentally. Eva left Sebastian to it and turned to face the others. She waited until she once again had Dominik's full attention before repeating herself. What of it? It's just that. Dominik fell silent. Yes, Eva prompted, hoping to hear what it was before Didi and Lilith arrived. Dominik swiped his palm back and forth across his forehead before answering her, his words hesitant. It's just that she can scramble your brain, leaving you as a baby unable to fend for yourself. And there's nothing you can do to protect yourself, added Luca, pulling Magda even tighter against his side. Eva stared at them aghast, unable to match this level of evil to the woman who had helped raise her, who was a constant presence in her life. The one who protected her when Georgia wasn't around. Now it was Eva's turn to wrinkle her brow in confusion. Nope, it wasn't helping. She couldn't recall a single instance of Didi scrambling someone's brain, at least not when she was around. Could it all be down to one hell of a PR campaign? Surely if Didi could scramble a vamp, Sebastian would have been taken care of centuries ago. All I know is that Didi hasn't turned on anyone during my lifetime. If she knows you're my friends, she won't hurt you. Eva said this with as much confidence as she could muster, even if one or two doubts hovered on the sidelines. As focused as they were on the imminent arrival of Didi, Eva didn't immediately notice what was missing, or rather who. It was a realization that had all of them fanning out to search the ground floor. Luckily, Sebastian hadn't made it far, with Magda taking great delight in dragging him out from under a bed in a nearby room. They'd secured him to a colossal statue of a water nymph using zip ties when Eva heard the familiar chatter of her VW van. Sure enough, Verdi pulled up behind the blue Mercedes and spluttered to a stop. Of the police who were stationed at the front gate, there wasn't a sign. Nor did Didi or Lilith appear worried about them appearing soon, with the women laughing as they exited the vehicle. They were still giggling as they made their way through the double front doors. Eva didn't wait, standing in front of Magda, Luca, and even Dominik and throwing her arms wide. Didi, these people are my friends. You will not harm them. Okay, so it was overly dramatic on Eva's part. But given what the others had said, for all she knew, Didi could well be some sort of vampire brain-scrambling monster. It wasn't a risk she was prepared to take. Didi inclined her head imperceptibly. It will be as you wish. As subtle as all this had been, Lilith missed it, her attention on the deflated vampire whom she was nudging with the toe of a ridiculously pointed boot. As when Eva had tried the same thing earlier, there was no response. Didi, we need your help to get Sebastian to talk. We need to know if he was behind the murders. Eva kept quiet about the police captain's potential involvement in the latest death, not wanting to delay matters any further. There'd be time later to explain everything to Lilith and Didi. After rubbing her hands together gleefully, Eva's receptionist smiled. It will be my pleasure. She then took a step toward the hapless vampire, her hands out in front of her. If not for him being zip-tied to the statue, he'd have fled for sure. Ah, what's Raphael Bauer doing here? This question from Lilith had Eva wheeling to face the young goth. What? Where? After looking pointedly at the deflated vampire, Lilith again nudged him with the toe of her boot. It wasn't until then that Eva truly looked at the man, eventually seeing what the Welsh vampire did. It was indeed the Austrian billionaire. During the fight, she'd seen him as nothing more than a dangerous vampire. And with his powers taken away thanks to the enchanted handcuffs, he looked nothing like the man she'd seen in the women's magazines. His presence might also explain why Sebastian could afford all those flashy cars. And where there was debt, there were vulnerabilities. What she didn't understand was how she'd miss seeing that Raphael was one of their kind. How come there's nothing in the vampire news about him? It was Luca who answered. I guess if he's rich enough, he can easily hide it. At Eva's puzzled look, he'd pressed on. You must surely have heard tell of masking spells? Boy, had she ever, with Sebastian having used one to steal the chronicle. This then had her wondering if it wasn't Raphael who was after the ancient relic all along. Given the secrets it held, it'd be a gold mine in the hands of someone like him. And with the interest rates the leech charged, it'd explain why the owner of Love Bites was desperate to be bloodbound to Eva and her money and power. Could it also be why Angel had her heart set on Raphael as a blood bond? It would have the girl angling for a superior, although in his current state, Eva doubted the Von Koenig girl would want anything to do with him. Unless. It was a thought she parked for later. Chapter 31. Any thoughts Eva had about her hastily formed plan vanished when Didi kneeled in front of Sebastian. As if aware of what was about to happen, he retreated as far as the water nymph would allow. When it got to where he had nowhere else to go, the receptionist slammed her hands none too gently on either side of the loathsome vampire's head. She then closed her eyes as if to concentrate, with there apparently no need to say anything. Sebastian, however, was a different story. The words rushed from his lips, tumbling over themselves to be free of his mouth, with every word damning him even further. While he'd killed the first girl, the rest were down to Hugo's quest for immortality. It was such a waste, with the police chief never going to achieve that without being bitten by a vampire. It was also something Sebastian wasn't prepared to do. He was more useful to me as a stupid human, ready to do my bidding. As her nemesis continued, he said nothing she wasn't already aware of. She already knew his feelings toward her were based on greed. There was no attraction on his side, other than for her money and the power that would be his if they were to be bound in blood. That he craved the social connections their union would bring was also no surprise. His being bloodbound to Eva would open doors that had remained closed to him, no matter how much money he threw at them. And then this one had to come sniffing around. Sebastian took time to spit in Dominik's direction before carrying on. I had to get that stupid book for Raphael before Dominik did something stupid, like bond with you. The look of disgust Sebastian then threw at Dominik had anger boiling in Eva's chest. The gorgeous hemophite at her side was 10 times the man that Sebastian would ever be. It was only Dominik putting his hand gently between her shoulder blades that had the ball of fury dissipate. Better this than she directed it at Sebastian and killed their only witness. With her anger safely under control, Dominik took his phone out and punched in an overly long number. While waiting for the call to be answered, he studiously avoided looking at anyone in the room, instead staring at the ceiling. I've got a collection for you. He grunted in response to something from the other end, before looking at the screen of his phone and rattling off what sounded like coordinates. Before he could put his phone away, a nearby door opened, and a man in a sharp suit stepped into the room. This shocked Eva on a couple of levels. First, it was the door to a coat closet. Second, it was one that was empty when she'd looked earlier after Sebastian snuck off. A brief nod at Dominik, and the stranger marched over to Sebastian and slapped on the same style of handcuffs as Magda had used on Raphael Bauer. And yet again, Eva witnessed a vampire lose their powers and revert to their human form. Humph, Sebastian was now a weasel of a man, and one who was soon released from the zip ties holding him to the nymph. Eva leaned in close to Dominik, in order to keep her voice low. Who is that? She was about to add, or rather what is that? But something stopped her. The energy rolling off the urbane man in waves belonged to a far larger creature than the one before them. There was also something primeval about him. Or was that good old-fashioned, garden-variety evil? His innate strength was confirmed when he dragged Sebastian to his feet as if he weighed nothing, holding him in place despite the ex-vampire's valiant struggles. Dominik inclined his head so he could answer her quietly. He's a reek. An enforcer, if you like. From All Hallows Keep, the prison Magda referred to earlier. Without letting go of Sebastian, the reek bent over and grabbed Raphael Bauer by the front of his jacket, lifting the unconscious man off the floor with ease. Eva was still working through the logistics when she stepped in front of the reek. This stopped him from moving and elicited gasps from everyone but Lilith. The reek stared hard at her, his gaze assessing, his mouth a tight line. Wait, officer. Are you able to leave this man for us to deal with? Eva jerked her head toward Raphael Bauer to confirm whom she was referring to. And why should I do that? His voice was deep, the intonation aggressive, rattling her to the core. Despite this, Eva stood her ground, proving to herself and the others that she was every bit Eva De Silva's granddaughter. Because I have need of his services. Rather than put anything more into words, Eva swamped the reek with her energy, bending him to her will. It was time to see if what Georgia said about her was true. She found out soon enough, taking a step backward to put some distance between herself and the creature now standing before them. The transformation from man about town to a horrendous mismatch of body parts had been instantaneous. While some features were human, others most definitely were not. That the reek had managed the make-under, without releasing Sebastian or Raphael, was the biggest shock. It spoke volumes about the control the creature had, even when bombarded with the level of energy Eva had hit it with. All she'd wanted to do was bend his will to her way of thinking. Not whatever had happened. Next to her, Lilith and Didi stood rigid, their fangs out, ready to defend themselves. It was a different story for Dominik, Luca, and Magda. While they were alert, they didn't appear shocked and horrified by the shape the reek had taken. It was as if they'd seen the like before. In stark contrast, Sebastian whimpered in terror, desperate to free himself. Despite her shock at the transformation, rather than retreat further, Eva corralled her energy, directing it at a spot between the creature's eyes. She wasn't sure who was more shocked when it simply dropped Raphael's unconscious form on the floor before dragging a screaming Sebastian over to the coat closet. There, the creature shoved the protesting man inside, joined him, and then shut the door. There was a bit of banging and crashing from inside the closet before silence descended. That the pair were no longer in there was obvious. Less obvious was where they'd vamoosed to. It was Dominik who spoke first. What the hell just happened? Eva thought he was talking about the pair in the closet until she noticed that he, Luca, and Magda were all giving her the side eye. In contrast, Didi patted her gently on the back. I always knew you had it in you. You are destined for great things. Then, as if the bubbly blonde hadn't gone all Yoder on them, she continued, nudging Raphael's unconscious form. So what's the plan with this one? Eva was still thinking about how to answer when the others started firing their own questions at her. Rather than respond, she held her hands up, stopping their words. Didi, if you were to rearrange Raphael's memories while he's human, would they hold if he were to revert to his vampire form? Didi shrugged. There's only one way to know for sure, but not here. Not now. Still fending off questions from Luca, Magda, and Dominik, Eva bent and grabbed Raphael by his jacket, as the reek had done earlier. She lifted him clear of the floor, although not with the ease shown by the creature. Lilith, can you open the side door of the van? The young vampire scrambled to do so, rushing out and wrenching it open, with Eva soon tossing their now moaning captive in the back. She'd straightened to find Dominik at her side with his brow creased in confusion. What on earth are you up to? If the reek grabbed him, he's guilty of something pretty bad. Enough to see him locked up for sure. We can't lock him up. I've got plans for him tonight. Dominik's reaction was immediate. After hissing in disapproval, his fangs lengthened, and an angry burst of energy exploded from his chest. It was enough to have Eva stumbling back and Magda inserting herself between the pair, although not to stop a potential fight. Rather, Dominik's cousin turned on Eva, showing she was firmly on his side in this altercation. But before she could act on it, Didi stepped in, sending Magda flying. You forget yourself, young one. Now it was Luca's turn to step into the fray, furious about Didi's treatment of his wife. It was only a piercing whistle from Lilith that had everyone freezing, the volume an assault on their vampiric senses. Guys, stop arguing. We've got a wedding to plan. She then rubbed her hands together in obvious glee. As he gazed at Eva, Dominik's face was a mask of shock tinged with sorrow. You are to marry him? His voice was raw, like sandpaper scratching against her soul. Her energy surged in response to his desolation, the intensity of it close to overwhelming her. Suddenly, she understood his response. It was as intense as hers had been when she'd first heard of Magda. While Eva wouldn't usually say anything thanks to agency confidentiality, she'd do anything to clear the sorrow from Dominik's beautiful face. No, he's to be blood-bound to Angel von Koenig. Magda was the first to react to this bombshell. But a hematophyte would never deign to be married to a lowly nouveau sang. She turned briefly to Didi and Lilith. No offense. Didi tipped her head in acknowledgement, her eyes dark pools of malice. None taken, and he'll marry whomever we dictate by the time I've finished with him. Hoping to further assuage Dominik's fears as to her plans for Raphael, Eva placed her hand gently on his chest. My dearest cousin, it'll all work out for the best. While she'd spoken softly, there was nothing subdued about Didi's response. Cousin? He's not your cousin. But you said. It was the very act of saying this that had Eva thinking back to that fateful night. Actually, Didi hadn't said they were related, only that Dominik's forebear had been the love of George's life. Next to her, Dominik stared at Didi, his expression one of urgency. Do you care to repeat that? Didi huffed out before answering. You're not cousins. Eva is a descendant of kings, not Lysander, whom that filthy nest of vipers you're related to stole away. Sheesh, talk about a sting in the tail of that explanation. However, if Eva thought Magda and Dominik would react to Didi's description of Natalia Zilonka, she was mistaken. Could it be there was no love lost between the pair and their matriarch? Certainly, they'd expressed no misgivings about her being incarcerated at All Hallows Keep, other than it being kept private. It was then she recalled the other thing the receptionist had said the night she and Dominik had accidentally bonded. That without blood having been exchanged, the bond between them could be reversed. But was that what she wanted? Because they weren't related, she could finally give in to her wicked desires. She moved ever closer to Dominik, being rewarded by waves of energy pulsing through her. There wasn't an inch of her body they didn't assail, leaving her senses in tatters. Dominik's filthy grin told her he knew exactly what he was doing, and that this was only the start. However, he soon got himself under control, even if he had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. Okay, it's all good that Raphael and the von Koenig girl are to be wed. But first, we need to deal with a missing murder suspect and a dead police chief. On hearing Raphael groaning, he leaned in Gertie's open door and placed his hand on the man's forehead. A second later, and the guy was once again unconscious. That should hold him for now. Luca, who'd also calmed himself, was the next to address Didi. The police, who are out front. How did you get by them? Told them we were here on official business, and that they should continue to guard the place as if their lives depended on it. She acted as if it was nothing, despite her actions being all that and more. There weren't many vampires who could coerce 4 humans simultaneously, as Didi apparently had. Magda inclined her head toward the front gates. Would it be possible to plant the idea that Sebastian murdered the backpackers? She looked in the general direction of Sebastian's bedchamber. And that it was him who took out their chief? Rather than answer, Didi disappeared. Or so it seemed, with her moving so fast she was hard to track. That she'd been headed for the front gates was enough for the remaining 5 vampires to understand. Magda's solution was perfect. It didn't matter that Sebastian wouldn't be dealt with by the local law. From what Dominik had told her, being incarcerated at All Hallows Keep was worse than anything he would face were he to remain. It also tidied up the loose end of Captain Hugo. Before long, the police cruiser pulled up behind Gertie with Didi walking alongside. The car doors flew open and the 4 cops spilled out. They then marched resolutely inside, ignoring Eva and the others on their way. Rather than leave them to wander aimlessly about, Dominik asked Didi to direct them over to the stairs leading to the basement. Because of this efficiency, the police soon disappeared, leaving Eva and the others free to depart. Eva was torn. While she wanted to get back to town and start planning Raphael and Angel's wedding, she was loath to leave Dominik's side. It was getting harder all the time to fight her intense attraction to him. If she didn't kiss him soon, she'd explode with pent-up frustration, with it looking as if he wasn't far behind her. Even more disturbing from her point of view was the irresistible longing to sink her teeth into his carotid artery and draw on the very essence of the man. Because of the intensity of this, it was all she could do to focus on Lilith's constant reminders that there was a wedding to organize. The goth was already abuzz with ideas for decorations. The other thing that had to take place was Didi brainwashing the groom, although not to the point he dribbled during the ceremony. Apparently, it was a fine line. And if all that weren't enough, Eva still had to sell the concept of the quickie wedding to the Baroness, although she doubted Angel's mother would fight it too much. Especially not if the nuptials wiped out that killer loan. Right, we need to leave before things get out of hand. Didi followed this up by clapping her hands loud enough to break the spell that was close to consuming Dominik and Eva. She then had to physically push Eva into the passenger seat in the front of the VW van before climbing in the back with their captive.
Enjoyed these chapters? We'd love it if you could give them a thumbs up. And if you'd like to continue the story, you can subscribe and tap the bell to be notified when the next chapter is released.